message is brought to you by Nuveen. Nuveen has provided investment excellence for 125 years. A lot has changed, but one thing that remains constant, including the different types of durable income in portfolios, can help investors meet their goals. With expertise across income and alternatives, Nuveen continues to expand its capabilities while maintaining its legacy as a leading investment manager. Visit Nuveen.com to learn more. Investing involves risk. Loss of principal is possible.
Smart shoppers often go on the hunt for discounts before making a purchase, but in some cases, shoppers can get a discount just by paying in cash. Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Amani Moise joins me. So Amani, how much of a discount do retailers typically offer?
So it's important to know that every retailer is different, and cash discount programs are mostly unregulated, so there's no official data on this. I've heard of cases where the discount can be as high as 15%, and somewhere it's only 3%. What's becoming more popular now are these apps that are now available on the fancy point-of-sale devices, so those tablets or the handheld devices that you'll see a waiter bring around or someone like that. And those apps typically allow retailers to offer 3 to 4% discount.
So how does this work? Do retailers have two prices posted for people paying with cash or a credit card?
In order to be compliant with a lot of the state laws and with the card association rules, card association in this case being the Visa and MasterCards of the world, absolutely yes. In order for it to be considered a discount, there have to be two prices, and the discounted price has to be lower than the standard price.
So why are retailers offering a discount for cash payment?
So merchants pay a fee for every single card transaction, and especially coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that they've seen is that adoption of digital payments, so card payments, Apple Pay, has really taken off, which means they're paying a fee on more of their revenue, and they're looking for ways to mitigate that.
So do some merchants encourage people to pay with cash?
Yeah, so that's why you'll see a tax discount, or you'll see retailers a lot of the time having a minimum purchase in order to pay with a card. That's very common as well.
So what types of businesses are more likely to offer a cash discount?
It's historically been really common at gas stations, but what we're seeing now is becoming more common in restaurant settings. So especially quick service restaurants, ideally if you're doing fine dining, they're not going to bother you over, a 3% on a $200 meal. So those types of businesses, and also small mom and pop retailers, convenience stores, or small gift shops, things like that.
What's been the trend in terms of cash purchases over the past couple of years?
They're definitely on the decline. Fewer people are carrying cash day to day, but what's interesting in the federal data that I saw is that the people who do carry cash are carrying more. Maybe it's to take advantage of these discounts.
Would a retailer ever choose not to offer a cash discount?
Well, cash isn't exactly free to accept either. If you're a business owner that does a lot of business in cash, you'll probably need to hire an armored truck or extra security to make sure that your employees are safe. Some businesses don't want the hassle of cash. It's also slower than accepting cards. I actually spoke to one business not too long ago that started off completely cashless because they said it slowed them down and it wasn't worth the risk of, unfortunately, something like a robbery or something like that.
For people paying with a credit card, is there any way to avoid the surcharge?
Unfortunately, with a credit card, that's harder. If you want to pay with a card, federal law prohibits companies from surcharging on debit card transactions just because for merchants, debit cards are a lot cheaper than credit cards for them to accept. There's not really a reason to surcharge on a debit card, which is why if you're seeing any processing fees, you should ask for the cash price if you're paying with a debit card.
So the merchants see the debit card use as equal to paying with cash?
Yes.
But using a credit card also has benefits, right?
Absolutely. So the merchant fee for debit cards is typically a fraction of a percent, whereas for credit cards, it can be closer to 4%, which is why there's such a big difference, which is also why credit cards come with so many more perks, like rewards, payment protection. So that's another thing that people should keep in mind. If you're at a merchant that's offering you a 3.5% cash discount, if you have rewards or cash back that could offset that, then maybe it's better to use your credit card than debit card.
So what rights do consumers have here? What if they see a surprise fee on their bill that shouldn't be there?
So if you suspect a company, merchant, retailer of implementing a cash discount program that's actually more like a fee program or a surcharge program, you could report them to the card network. So whatever logo's on your card, whether that's a Visa logo, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, you could report that retailer for having what you suspect as an out-of-compliance program, and there are fines that those companies may have to pay if they're found to be out of compliance.
That's Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Amani Moise. And that's it for your money briefing. He'll be back tomorrow morning with a look at why some second-year MBA students are having a hard time lining up job offers with WSJ's Lindsay Ellis. Today's show was produced by Zoe Culkin with supervising producer Melanie Roy. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for listening.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Autograph Collection, part of Marriott Bonvoy. Each of the almost 300 independent hotels in the Autograph Collection are designed to be exactly like nothing else. Visit autographcollection.com to find something unforgettable.
What's good, y'all? So the news that's been happening in Gaza and Israel has been heavy on our minds here at Code Switch, and we know it's probably on yours too. People are asking really important questions about power and violence and oppression, all the things we get into on the show a lot. And we're working on covering this moment with nuance and humanity, but we just don't want to add to the din right now. So we're going to come back to this when we have something useful to say. All right, on to the show. All right, y'all, just a heads up, this episode is going to contain some salty language, which means it's going to be some cussing, so you've been warned. What's good, y'all? You're listening to Code Switch. I'm Gene Dunby. Any new parent will tell you about how much information, how many opinions gets thrown at them about how to raise their kids. A lot of the stuff you're going to hear is contradictory. A lot of it is just suggestions you ain't even asked for about how to feed your baby, about what to feed your baby, about sleep schedules, about screen time. Oh my God, the screen time discourse, y'all. And that advice is rarely, really about, formula versus breastfeeding. Those conversations are really about your values, the way you see the world, or the way you're supposed to see the world. And becoming a parent makes all of these questions about your values more urgent. Like, what do I want to pass on to my child? What's the stuff I grew up with that I absolutely do not want to pass along? Your parents' own choices about how to parent you might become way more legible to you, or maybe it might make less sense. It's a very heady time, y'all. Much of what we inherit and pass on, though, is kind of a social momentum we get from the people around us. Just a few weeks ago, an expecting father I know, a white dude, told me about how casually and consistently other white folks he knew have started telling him and his wife, kind of warning them really, that they shouldn't get too attached to their house or their neighborhood in DC because in a few years they were going to have to move, because of the schools. And by now, we all know that because of the schools, it's kind of a smokescreen, it's kind of a dog whistle, right? It's about race and real estate and taxes and residential segregation and hoarding resources. Shout out to Hannah Jaffe Walt. And when his child gets here, that child is going to be implicated in all of that. Anyway, y'all, I keep thinking about that conversation because my friend got invited into this new club where people are like, okay, you're one of us now. This is what's expected. And that happens a lot too, right? When you become a new parent, if you become a new parent, you've got this whole new identity that adds fresh dimension and texture and consequence to the other identities that you're already carrying around. This week, we are revisiting a conversation about some of this stuff that I had with the comedian Hari Kondabolu about race and identity and parenting. It was over a year ago, and I was still more or less in that fugue state of fresh parenthood when we recorded this, which you're probably going to hear, I'm sorry. But Hari was a little further along as a parent, and both of us had our kids during, a global pandemic. So those normal new parent feelings of dread about the state of the world, of social isolation, all that was just supercharged. And a lot of those feelings make up the backbone of his comedy special from this past summer. It's called Vacation Baby.
Me and my partner have had very different experiences being parents, and it was clear it was going to be different from day one. I remember she was holding the baby in her arms, and she was crying, and she looked at the baby, and then she looked at me, and she said, "This is the greatest thing I've ever created." And I think she wanted me to say me too, but the thing is, I have a Netflix special, and it's so good, like from beginning to end, joke, wonderful the whole way through. I just met this kid, you know what I mean? The jury is out.
When I spoke to Hurry back in 2022, when our kids were smaller, I started by asking him a deliberately provocative question. Is fatherhood even necessary today?
It's complicated because on one hand, it's like, what's the difference between fatherhood and parenting, right?
Exactly.
And then when you start creating differences, those are gender differences, right? And like examples that are based on like gender norms. And then, especially in the last few years in the mainstream, there's been more of like a critical questioning of gender, right? And so it's almost like, well, even claiming I'm a father, and let's say, I have a son, right? Like, even that, just saying I have a son is like, okay, I'm going with what he was assigned at birth, which I guess I helped assign it. Like, as a father who is raising a son, I still want to try to teach my kid not to be a piece of shit, right? How do I raise a kid that is not steeped in toxic masculinity, that, maybe he's still seeing in the outside world. I want them to know that, like, being a quote-unquote man does not have to look this way. And at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if conveying that stuff is limiting him and also reinforcing something in society. Should I just be viewing this as a human being? I'm a human being raising a human being, and I'm like, I don't know. And that's usually when the kid poops, and then you stop thinking about it. You're just like, whoever this animal is, the diaper has to be changed.
Yeah, I mean, that gif with like Puffy and that dude when they're just sort of staring at each other, like I feel like that is me and my baby right now. It's like just trying to size each other up, and I actually don't know who in that gif I am, if I'm Puffy looking like judging the other person or the person there in the headlines being judged. But right now I feel like I'm thinking all these big existential thoughts, and the logistics of being a parent is just like feeding, sleeping, pooping, cuddling, right? Like,
yeah.
We're not at the stage where we're necessarily talking, like my kid doesn't understand anything yet, right? But I know that we are going to have to sit with these big questions about, like you said, not being a piece of shit, and gender and race very soon. Like, these are not avoidable questions, and also that the way that I'm answering these questions is going to be very different from the way that my mom answered these questions for me, right?
That's right.
And you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but I'm wondering who, if anyone, you were looking to as a template for like the kind of father you would like to be.
I mean, I think I'm fortunate enough, or depending on your situation, to have a father that is in my life, was there growing up. So I guess the assumption is, well, isn't that the role model? And I have complicated feelings, about that. I mean, I think my father, like a lot of men from a lot of different cultures, I'm going to talk specifically about my South Indian culture, like grew up steeped in patriarchy, as did my mother, right? So, growing up, he never cooked, he never cleaned, he never did the laundry, he didn't, like, all these things that were considered women's work. And the thing is, that was reinforced to me not only by the fact that he didn't do those things, that my mother did those things, but also if I was going to the kitchen or wanted to help, I was told, this isn't your job.
By who?
So it was by my mother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's why patriarchy is deep. It's not just like men who are affected by it. Like, it becomes part of it's like, this is how you raise a boy, which is confusing to me looking at it now, because my mom is somebody who broke lots of gender norms in southern India as a woman that was educated, who didn't want to get married as her first, like, this is what I...
The price goes up. That investment comes with some complications. Drew Pasquarella at Cornell University says companies prefer to be judged on their individual performance, like how well Lululemon's mid-rise pants are selling. But when a company joins an index, those factors can lose relevance.
There are institutional investors that are buying and selling an index not based on what Lululemon is doing, but based overall on macroeconomic factors.
That means big investors might start selling if they're worried about, say, global economic growth, interest rates, or consumer confidence,
as opposed to understanding that those macro factors might be more limited in their impact on one company versus others.
Big investors have also been getting more aggressive when it comes to environmental and social issues, says Evan Raleigh at the University of Connecticut.
There's like a social contract that institutional investors believe firms have with society to behave in ways that are pro-social.
So those issues will likely become more important for any company that joins the S&P 500. I'm Justin Howe for Marketplace.
All right, let's do the numbers. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are all down, with in the 2 to 0.6% range. The Dow futures down 75 points. The yield on the 10-year Treasury is 4.870%. After an explosion hit a hospital in Gaza, killing 500 people, Palestinian and Israeli officials blamed each other. Leaders of Arab states called off a planned visit with President Biden, who will instead only visit Israel. The trip was aimed at preventing the Israel-Hamas war from spreading. Concerns over economic consequences of this war take a far back seat to the human tragedy. But there are geopolitical risks to the global economy, as Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer reports.
There are lots of ways the Israel-Hamas war could play out. The worst-case scenario, direct conflict between Israel and Iran.
The geopolitical pot is just boiling.
Bernard Baumol is chief global economist at the Economic Outlook Group. He says if the conflict widened to include Syria, global economic growth could decline next year by as much as 1%, and
the global economy would really be on a tightrope over the possibility of a recession.
Baumol says a wider conflict could send oil prices up to $120 a barrel. Other lesser-known commodities could also be affected.
Maybe you remember bromine from high school chemistry class?
Jesse Colvin is an analyst at Height Capital Markets.
It's a key chemical component in electronics, including the manufacturing of semiconductor chips.
Colvin says 74% of the world's bromine supply is produced in the Dead Sea, and Israel's bromine exports could be jeopardized if rockets hit Israeli ports. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace. Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Viking. Exploring the world in comfort, Viking offers a small ship experience with cultural enrichment and destination-focused dining. More at Viking.com. And by Charles Schwab. Schwab believes every investor deserves to work with a firm they can count on, with financial consultants ready to serve clients and 24/7 live help.
The historic Hollywood writers' strike is over. The actors' strike is not. And if actors aren't acting, all kinds of other TV and film workers are also out of a job. Set builders, editors. Employment in this sector is down 45,000 jobs since May. LAS's Robert Garova has more.
Greg Gilday is a welder and set builder. He makes spaceships for a living. Not real ones, but the ones like you can see in the new Star Wars Ahsoka series.
One must destroy in order to create.
But right now, Gilday feels like he's fighting a battle in a galaxy not so far away. Because of the Hollywood stalemate, Gilday has been out of work for months.
I've dug into my savings quite extensively and still have about $27,000 in debt that I did not have at the end of April, which is the last time I worked.
He supports the strikers, but the work stoppage is hitting him and thousands of others hard. The Entertainment Community Fund said it's been distributing up to $700,000 each week in emergency grants for struggling workers. Keith McNutt is with the nonprofit and says the strike came just as many workers were still financially recovering from the pandemic.
And people, I think, were just starting to rebuild their reserves, their savings for a rainy day, and it started raining before people were ready.
In some cases, workers have had to get creative to pay the bills. For the past couple of months, they've held swap meets where prop masters, makeup artists, and costume designers can sell personal belongings.
Is on his way back from Tel Aviv. His trip was meant to show support for Israelis grappling with the Hamas attacks that killed some 1,400 people on October 7th. That day has been compared to the 9/11 attacks on the United States. President Biden said he understands what that feels like, but he also had a warning.
But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes.
Meanwhile, there was rage across the Middle East. Rage sparked by a deadly explosion at a hospital in Gaza that killed hundreds of people just before Biden left for this trip. NPR national political correspondent Mara Liasson is here. Hey, Mara.
Hey, Mary Louise.
The president was on the ground for what, about 7 hours? How did it go?
Yes, he was on the ground for about 7 hours, and I think the trip was a microcosm of how difficult and fraught this issue is for Biden. How little control the U.S. has over events, and the trip was overtaken by events. He was supposed to also go to Amman, Jordan, to meet with 3 key Arab leaders, but that meeting was canceled because of the explosion in the hospital. The explosion sparked protests against the region. As you said, it inflamed public opinion in the Muslim world. Hamas blames Israel for the explosion, although Biden says the U.S. has information showing that it was an errant rocket from a militant group called Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So the president wants to be a staunch supporter of Israel. He wants to stop a wider conflagration in the Middle East. He also wants to make sure that support for Israel doesn't evaporate because of the way Israel responds to the attack. It's going to be very hard to accomplish all of those things.
Yeah, well, the White House said that Biden did pose some tough questions on this for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu when they met today. I want you to listen to a little bit of what Biden said afterwards.
I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for leadership. There's always cost. It requires being deliberate. It requires asking very hard questions. It requires clarity about the objectives and an honest assessment about whether the path you're on will achieve those objectives.
What is he getting at?
I think he's saying it's going to be very hard to eliminate Hamas because it's interwoven into Gaza's civilian society. Military installations, command centers, they're all in civilian buildings. It's not clear how Israel plans to eliminate Hamas or whether it's even possible. And if it is possible, what happens afterwards? Who runs Gaza after Hamas? The Israelis don't seem to have a clear plan on that. And on this trip, Biden was saying that 2 things could be incompatible. He's saying 2 things that could be incompatible. We understand your right to retaliate, that's the first thing. And he says, but we also want you to protect the human rights of civilians in Gaza. And one of the things Biden did come away with today that was a positive was an agreement by Israel to let food, water, and medicine into Gaza as soon as possible.
Well, and I want to track back. You mentioned this meeting that was called off. That was going to include the president of Egypt, also the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas. How effective can Biden's diplomacy be if other leaders in the region won't sit down with him?
Well, that was definitely a setback, although on board Air Force One on the way home, Biden did talk to the Egyptian president, and he told reporters on board Air Force One that President el-Sisi had agreed to open up the Rafah Gate, that's in southern Gaza, to allow up to about 20 trucks of humanitarian aid into Gaza. That's something that the Egyptians have been reluctant to do. But he did say if Hamas confiscates the aid, then it will end.
So what does all this mean, Mara, for Biden, for his foreign policy priorities?
Well, it sets them back. We're going to hear more about this from him tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. He's going to address the nation from the Oval Office, but it threatens to upend or distract from his other foreign policy objectives, like making sure Ukraine has enough weapons to defend against the Russian invasion, or making sure Taiwan is also heavily armed.
That is NPR's Mara Liasson. Thanks, Mara.
Thank you.
And remember, everyone, there can be no aid to Israel until the House of Representatives elects a speaker. And lawmakers are no closer to doing that at this hour. A second ballot vote today saw opposition only grow against Ohio Republican Jim Jordan, with 22 lawmakers voting against him. That's 2 more opponents than on the first ballot taken yesterday. Lawmakers were told to go home after that, and another vote is possible tomorrow. Well, in the meantime, NPR political correspondent Susan Davis joins us. Hey, Sue.
Hey, Elsa.
Okay, so where do things stand right now for Jim Jordan?
He has a choice to make. He has to decide whether he wants to try and force a third ballot vote, but there is no indication from talking to any of these opponents that he can flip any of their votes. Arkansas Republican Congressman Steve Womack is one of the Republicans who voted against him on both the first and second ballot. And he told reporters he thinks this is very different than back in January when Kevin McCarthy had to turn 20 votes to get the votes to become speaker. He said those Republicans were holding out because they wanted something. And in this case, these Republicans don't want anything from Jim Jordan. There is no negotiation. There is no horse trading. They just don't want him to be speaker. Now, what's unclear, if Jim Jordan can't get to 217, which is the votes you need, and Majority Leader Steve Scalise dropped out because he did not believe he'd get to 217,
right?
There's really no path for anyone to get to 217. So Republicans are in a bit of a mess. Womack even went so far as to suggest that, hey, maybe Kevin McCarthy could just be speaker.
Oh boy, not that again. Okay, well, I know that there's a pressure campaign on these holdouts, especially in conservative media. Like Fox News host Sean Hannity posted on social media for his followers to call their offices and demand that they vote for Jordan. How are lawmakers responding to that?
They're really bad about it. Texas Republican Kate Granger, she is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. That's the committee that writes all 12 spending bills. She described her vote against Jordan as one of conscience, and she said that, quote, intimidation and threats will not change my position. A lot of the holdouts here are senior lawmakers like Granger. Several of them have military service. A lot of the opposition is anchored in members who sit on the Appropriations and Armed Services Committee. These are lawmakers who are acutely aware of Jim Jordan's record of opposing spending bills and of his current skepticism of military aid to Ukraine. Another notable element to this group, Elsa, is that a third of them voted to certify the 2020 election results, when the vast majority of Republicans did not, including Jim Jordan. And Jordan was a very close ally of former President Donald Trump on, after, and during the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And at least one of his opponents, Ken Buck in Colorado, has cited that as part of the reason he remains opposed to him.
Interesting. Well, meanwhile, I understand that Democrats continue to publicly offer their support for a Republican speaker, but only if Republicans are willing to enter a power-sharing deal with Democrats. So, I mean, given that Republicans are deadlocked with no end in sight, why don't they just take the Democrats up on their offer?
You know, politically, Republicans still say they need to elect a Republican speaker with Republican votes. That said, there is a conversation that is growing among some Republicans to try to empower the Speaker Pro Tem, that's Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, to bring bills to the floor so they're not in this deadlock and not able to get anything done. There's some warming to the idea, but frankly, you know, doing that would alleviate pressure to elect a speaker. And if doing that, you would need to get some support for Democrats, and that just seems really politically untenable for most Republicans to have to rely on Democrats to govern in the House.
To be continued. That is NPR political correspondent Susan Davis. Thank you so much, Sue.
You're welcome.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News.
This is 91.7 WVXU. If Ohioans approve Issue 1 of the ballot box on November 7th, the right to abortion and reproductive rights would be enshrined in the Ohio Constitution. Opponents say passage would take away rights of parents to know before their child under 18 gets an abortion. But supporters say it will strengthen parents' rights. In the second part of her two-part series on Issue 1, State House correspondent Joe Ingles tries to sort it all out.
You may have seen this ad on TV talking about how Ohio parents now have to sign off before their child under 18 can get an abortion.
Today, you have a right to go through that door, to be there for her, to help. If Issue 1 becomes law, that door locks forever.
It's a point that's repeated over and over by opponents. Lieutenant Governor John Huston.
This eliminates parental consent for your daughters.
Attorney General Dave Yost is a vocal opponent of Issue 1. He took the unusual step of assigning his office to do analysis of Issue 1, and it pushed back on opponents' arguments in saying the amendment does not specifically address parental consent. But it did note the parental consent law will almost certainly be challenged, and if there's no guarantee, it will remain in effect. Mark Weaver is a former Ohio Deputy Attorney General, a longtime Republican strategist, and is strongly anti-abortion. He's not sure what will happen.
It's important to remember that one of the key portions of this amendment was the ACLU, and they have challenged parental rights legislation.
Dan Porter, a law professor at the Capital University School of Law, says parental consent laws were challenged at the U.S. Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was in effect, and that court kept them in place. He says Michigan passed the same amendment last year, and its parental consent law stands. And Cole thinks the wording of the amendment supports Ohioans' parental rights.
A very persuasive argument could be made that having parental involvement in most cases advances the health interests of a pregnant minor. After all, parents know their medical history, they know, what their physical condition might be, what their psychological condition is. So I think that the state, even if they face a challenge, could very well meet the standards set forth in the amendment.
Supporters of Issue 1 also point to the 82 days last summer when Ohio's ban on abortions after 6 weeks was in effect. They say that ban prevented parents from making decisions, such as in the case of a 10-year-old rape victim who had to go to Indiana to get an abortion because Ohio's ban didn't have an exception for rape or incest. Kelly Copeland, a spokeswoman for Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights, sees it this way.
To know that voting yes on Issue 1 actually strengthens parental rights in Ohio.
Ohio's 6-week ban is on hold pending litigation, and legal experts agree it would likely fall if Issue 1 passes. Opponents of the amendment point out it uses the word individual rather than woman, but supporters say that's because the amendment also allows for other reproductive rights, like miscarriage care, IVF, and birth control. That language is not in the ballot summary that was adopted by the Republican-dominated ballot board. Issue 1 opponents also claim the amendment is vague enough that it would allow for minors to get sex change operations. There are no references to gender reassignment procedures in this amendment. Yost did not address that in his legal analysis, and numerous legal experts say they don't believe the language in this amendment will allow for this because they don't Joe Lemons at the Ohio Public Radio State House News Bulletin.
Support comes from Ball & Gaynor. For more than 30 years offering personalized financial planning and an investment philosophy focused on growing clients' income. The goal in a world of uncertainties, delivering peace of mind. Learn more about Ball & Gaynor online at dividendspaydividends.com.
Support comes from Voltage, located in Oakley, open Tuesday through Saturday 10 to 5 or by appointment. Get fresh ideas for furnishings, lighting, accessories, and outdoor furniture to complement your living space. Voltage focused on bringing inspired living spaces to the Tri-State for 33 years. VoltageFurniture.com. That's VoltageFurniture.com.
This traffic report is supported by Speedway. Northbound 71 after Dana. There's a wreck on the right shoulder that's slowing things back to Montgomery Dana. Southbound 71 after Kenwood Road. There's a wreck blocked in the right lane. Southbound 275 after 74. There's a wreck. In Montgomery County, southbound 75 at Dryden Road, the 2 left lanes are blocked by a wreck. And in Warren County, southbound State Route 48, south of Ridgeview Lane and Saddle Creek, there's a wreck there. Turning mostly cloudy, a low of 53 tonight. Rain likely on Thursday, a high tomorrow of 65. It's 64 degrees now. Thank you for tuning in today to 91.7 WVXU.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Elsa Chang. The mother of the Alabama teenager who went missing in Aruba in 2005 finally found out what happened to her daughter today. As part of a plea agreement, Joran Vandersloot confessed to murdering Natalie Holloway. Reporter Melanie Peoples was in the courtroom in Birmingham.
It's not a conviction of murder, but the guilty plea that Joran Vandersloot entered in court today included sitting down with Beth Holloway and explaining what happened to her daughter. Holloway addressed a throng of reporters outside the federal court in Birmingham.
It's been a very long and painful journey, but we finally got the answers we've been searching for all these years. We finally, today, we got justice for Natalie.
Holloway says Vandersloot told her that he did indeed kill her daughter after she rebuffed his sexual advances and then threw her body into the ocean. He won't serve time for the murder, but Beth Holloway says finally getting an admission is enough.
Joran Vandersloot's confession means we have finally reached the end of our never-ending nightmare. And for me, reaching the end of the nightmare, being over is better than closure.
Vandersloot was a main suspect, but law enforcement officers on the Dutch Caribbean island never managed to mount a successful case and ultimately closed it. 5 years after killing Natalie Holloway, Vandersloot murdered a college student in Lima, Peru, and has been serving a prison sentence there ever since. But what brought him to Alabama was his attempt to sell information to Beth Holloway in 2010. She paid him $25,000, but Vandersloot lied to Holloway. That got him federal charges on extortion and wire fraud. In today's plea agreement, Vandersloot will be sent back to Peru, where he's expected to serve 22 more years in prison. For NPR News, I'm Melanie Peoples in Birmingham.
Veterans who survive a brush with death sometimes mark the anniversary. They call it their Alive Day. Jay Price of WUNC has the story of one such day.
I met Justin Constantine on the morning of October 18th, 2006. This would be our shared Alive Day, but we didn't know it then. Justin was a major in the Marine Reserves. In civilian life, he was a lawyer for the Department of Homeland Security. But in Iraq, the stated mission of his job was to improve Iraqi lives, a role he later described in speeches like this one to the Marines Memorial Association.
I just